Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. He is Daniel Gallen, and we are fresh out of the Beaver Stadium press box, where we witnessed the Nittany Lions have quite the rebound following their first loss of the season. 3-0 deficit after the first quarter, but you look at the final score, the overall performance that Penn State put out there, 45-17 win that was quite convincing. And Daniel, when I looked ahead to what our Saturday night and now into Sunday morning post-game pod might look like this week, there was a scenario where it was going to be a troubling conversation for this program. They avoided that. Everybody gets to kind of take a foot away from the ledge a little bit here. We've got a lot to dissect, but this was very much a get-right game at the right moment for these Nittany Lions.
Most definitely. I was looking back through my predictions and what I wrote before the game, and I was wrong. I thought that we would see a little bit of struggles from Penn State based on kind of what we've seen these past few years in terms of these things snowballing, one loss into two, into three. And Penn State came out the other side with a big win. Like you said, it was a 3-0 game at the end of the first quarter. You look at it a couple hours later, it's 38-10. Penn State really was able to take advantage of what Minnesota gave them, and they really ran away from it. So all things considered, super impressive win, and I think it sets them up very nicely for what's ahead.
Yeah, number 16, Penn State, in this matchup did not have to deal with Tanner Morgan, who, of course, they saw a few years back and has been Minnesota's starter for some time, a 6-year senior. On the other side of the process here was 6-year senior quarterback Sean Clifford getting that starting nod for the Nittany Lions. Number 40, 40th start in his Penn State career. We talked a lot about this week the kind of conversation that has been speculated upon and really has kind of taken over in the past 6-7 days. And can Sean Clifford remain the quarterback for Penn State if they intend to get better over the course of this year? Have they reached that kind of a ceiling? And certainly there was an answer from Clifford this week. And we found out that there was a pain management situation with him. We don't know the details of any kind of injury, but James Franklin said after the game today, it's not a structural thing. It's a pain management kind of process for Sean Clifford. And that was like worst case scenario, because we were envisioning a possibility where James Franklin sends out number 14 for his 40th start and kind of replay of what we've seen in the past where he's not physically up to the task. It sets Penn State behind. And 3 possessions into this one, Daniel, 2 punts, 2 3-and-outs, and an interception on a poorly thrown ball downfield on the only early shot they took looking for Parker Washington. And the boos were coming down from Beaver Stadium. And quite frankly, they didn't start during the game. They started before the game when he was announced as that starting quarterback. So he answered the bell today, but we've got to acknowledge that Beaver Stadium, a large percentage of this fan base, it seemed, they were at a boiling point today. And Sean Clifford, to his credit, turned the heat down in a significant way.
Things really could have gone sideways when you look at the whiteout environment, what Penn State and specifically Sean Clifford had done over the past 2 weeks, or really even since that Central Michigan game. People were a little restless, it felt like. And then when you go 3-and-out on your first 2 possessions, when you throw that bad interception, especially with what happened last week where Penn State couldn't stay on schedule, couldn't stay ahead of the sticks. I think that we kind of thought that, this might be a similar type of offensive performance. The biggest difference in the game was that Minnesota wasn't doing what Michigan was able to do early on, which obviously I think helped that Penn State offense. But I was a little bit surprised to hear the boos pregame. I thought that maybe it would have been a little bit more of a muted response as opposed to more negativity. But then when you go 3-and-out twice to start the game, when you throw that kind of interception, I think you're going to get that kind of reaction. Yeah, it's not a surprise to hear that. So I thought that Sean Clifford really did a good job answering the call. I think that it's something that we've kind of learned about him over the course of his career. When you put him in the corner, when his back is up against the wall, when no one is believing in him at this point, that's when he steps up. 4 touchdown passes, 295 yards, 23 to 31. I mean, outside of that interception, the mistakes, felt pretty few and far between. He wasn't sacked. It was just a very, very solid outing from Sean Clifford, a little bit closer to what we were seeing in those first 3 weeks of the season last month.
Yeah, just like when you think you're maybe at the breaking point with Sean Clifford, maybe you're at that pivot moment where the program takes a turn and looks elsewhere. No, I mean, James Franklin didn't lend any credence to that over the course of this game week, and certainly after this game, he was very adamant when asked about his reaction to the the negativity when Sean Clifford was announced, when they had the early struggles. He did not touch that, but he went off for a while talking about how much he respects Sean Clifford, and it's not really a surprise. James Franklin said this week that he has earned the right to be on the field, and I do want to make this point. Coming off 4 touchdown performance. His completion percentage today was at 74%. It was at 44% cumulatively in the first couple of games against October. With all that said, and they needed this bounce back, and no one individually needed it more than Sean Clifford did at the quarterback spot. But I don't think he's going to necessarily sway the jury based on what happened for a few hours tonight in Beaver Stadium against this Minnesota squad. There's really nothing I think that he could have done tonight to get the taste out of people's mouth, to kind of get maybe the PTSD from some of the experience they've had with Sean Clifford-led offenses in the past. A lot of it's going to come down to next week against Ohio State. It's a matchup that's going to have a lot of eggs in that basket in a lot of different ways. But for Sean Clifford, I think at least it quells some of that noise. It lends credence to James Franklin's decision and Mike Yurcich's comments this week to stick by their man and stick by him on a week like this, when you can feel the team maybe teetering a little bit, and what happens on Saturday is going to determine a lot about their trajectory over the course of the remainder of this season. And speaking with players and coaches and hearing from Sean Clifford after this game, they're aware of the noise. They're aware that there are people who would like to see him removed from the equation at this stage of his career. But he's also not ready to step aside. And Penn State, they are certainly willing to keep that investment in place. And it's going to remain the Sean Clifford show at quarterback for at least another week here in Penn State. It's always feels like we're on the verge of maybe shifting that conversation a little bit further at quarterback. But this has really kind of put a pin in that for right now. We did see Drew Aller late six games that he's been involved with now. But this is not a week looking ahead now that it's appropriate, it would seem, based on what we've heard from the staff and what we've talked about. Any kind of QB controversies talk needs to be set aside in this moment, and we'll see what it looks like coming out of the following matchup.
Yeah, I didn't really expect that we were going to see Drew Aller in a blowout tonight. I thought that if you told someone coming into this game that Drew Aller is going to play, I think a lot of people's minds would have gone towards the negative, that things weren't going well. And that's why we would see the freshman. But Penn State got out to that really, really big lead. And then you can turn it over to the freshman, get him some reps in the whiteout. They did some interesting things with the offensive line in front of him with some younger guys. And they were able to, get some of these reps, get experience, get some more seasoning for a couple of younger guys, which, you don't normally pencil that in for some of these Big Ten games. And I think that with what we kind of expected out of Minnesota, I don't really think we expected to see that either. But a big reason for that was Sean Clifford, the 4 touchdowns, the throw to Tyler Warren and the throw to Theo Johnson. He got the tight ends involved and found them, made good throws to them. And then I thought that the touchdown pass to Mitchell Tinsley was just a very good veteran play, where I feel like a lot of times with Sean Clifford, there's the screenshots where someone's wide open and he's not looking at them, or he's throwing the ball elsewhere. But this was one of the occasions where no one was covering Mitchell Tinsley. He was wide open. Tinsley saw it. Clifford saw it. I think all of Beaver Stadium saw it, and they were able to take advantage of that easy thing, which for a team that sometimes makes things just so hard, I thought that was a very, very good takeaway from this.
It was a take what's available to you kind of performance from Sean Clifford. Now, they did take some shots, which was really great to see from a Penn State fan perspective, because you're able to capitalize on tremendous catch from Tinsley, as you referred to that. And Parker Washington's touchdown was as good as any grab that we've seen from a Nittany Lion over the course of this year, and really an important moment for Parker Washington as we kind of look for him to go for launch here. And we're at the point now, we're in late October. He's running out of time to do that. Maybe this is kind of a turning point for Parker Washington and his season. He had 70 yards today. The yardage totals haven't been there, but when you come down with a grab like that in a moment like that to put the game away, put it on ice, essentially, it says a lot about that confidence that Clifford has in Parker Washington, and a receiver going up and for a contested catch and bringing it down. It's a strong moment that we haven't really seen a lot of from this passing attack. But you mentioned the tight ends, and let's go to there, because it wasn't the Brenton Strange show as it was all through September. And lately, it hasn't been much of anything from the tight ends in the last 2 games. That changed in a big way today. Theo Johnson was all over the place. He reached the end zone. Tyler Warren scored his first touchdown of the season. And overall, on a week that was another kind of subplot as we kind of parse through the offensive shortcomings. It started with Sean Clifford in the quarterback spot, and what do you do there? And maybe next on that list was, how are you going to maximize your skill sets on this offensive roster, specifically at the tight end position? And that's another spot where they checked off the list and made you feel pretty good about Penn State following a week in which you felt pretty bad in that regard.
We've heard so much about this tight end room, and you were kind of waiting for it to really kick into gear. Brenton Strange had his games earlier this year, but Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren were both more sort of bit players. And that changed. Theo Johnson came in with 2 catches for 19 yards. And on one drive, he had 2 catches for 43 yards. I think that was the field goal drive. So, when he got the ball in his hands, he was able to make big plays. He talked earlier this week about wanting to add value. And I think that he really did that. He showed what he can do. 5 catches, 75 yards, a touchdown, long catch of 25 yards. I think that he's a playmaker, and he really showed it. But I think the fact that he and Tyler Warren were involved, they got the ball in their hands, they made plays. I think we got kind of the classic dirty work performance from Brenton Strange, where he's lead blocking for Katron Allen in the off tackle out of the T formation, and I'll have to take a closer look at him when you watch the game back, because the stats weren't there, but he's someone that I think has put himself in the position where he can really contribute. So I was looking back through the numbers and thought there are some interesting parallels to the whiteout last year, where I think it was 8 catches for 130 yards, 2 total touchdowns for the 3 tight ends. Today was 7 catches for I think 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, this position group that showed up in the whiteout last year against Auburn, showed up in the whiteout this year against Minnesota. I think the bigger difference will be, what will really tell the story is what this looks like moving forward. After the game, James Franklin said that they didn't put any extra emphasis on the tight ends. It was just kind of what Minnesota was giving them, where I think Franklin worded it as where the defense was telling Sean Clifford to throw the football. And that was the tight ends this week. Who knows what it'll be next week. But I think that this group shows that if you can get the ball to them, that the offense, can move. You can advance the ball. They're also capable of making big plays, and they're very valuable to what Penn State can do.
Coming into this matchup, those 2 tight ends and Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren had combined for 6 catches, 58 yards, no scores on the season. Tonight, that changed in a big way. They combined for 108 receiving yards and a couple touchdowns. And last Saturday, Sean Clifford in this Penn State offense, there was completions to 4 different tight ends / wide receivers over the course of that entire game. 4 different tight ends and wide receivers got into the end zone against Minnesota. So again, it kind of talking about just how different of a performance this was for Penn State. And Sean Clifford, who, by the way, I don't think we gave the official stat line, but 74% completion, 295. That's the most passing yards for him in a game this year. 4 touchdowns. He had the ugly interception early. Things were pretty ugly generally for the Penn State offense early. But another kind of pick-me-up moment here as we go through and review what changed from last Saturday to this Saturday was what happened on the ground. And it was those two freshman running backs heavily involved. Kevon Lee was out in pregame warmups, was not involved there, but he was out in uniform. And by the time we saw him for the first half, he was in street clothes, and it was apparent that it was going to be the Singleton and Allen show. Nick Singleton, Daniel, 13 carries, 79 yards. He had a 30-yard touchdown that, again, helped create all that separation in the second half. But he also had a 22-yard reception in this game where he showed off what he can do with the ball in his hands. That 22-yard pickup through the air was his longest gain going all the way back to the Auburn matchup back in September 17th. So he had a couple big plays over the course of this one, and it was Katron Allen with more of the same kind of ability to go average 5 yards on the ground while getting 15 carries. 77 yards is where he finished on the day. And I'll tell you, after both these guys had 6 carries for less than 20 yards against Michigan, collectively they've averaged less than 4 yards per carry against Big Ten opponents coming into the matchup. They achieved that balance today that we wondered, was that slipping away from them, the kind of balance that we thought they might be capable of doing offensively in 2022. And Sean Clifford felt like they played their most complete game offensively of this season today in a 45-17 win.
And you look at these stat lines for the running backs, Katron Allen, no lost yardage. Nick Singleton lost 2 yards. I think that both of them, especially Allen, had done a really good job of that early in the season. And then the past couple of weeks, that was a little bit more difficult. It wasn't quite the same. So I think this running game really got back on track. Katron Allen had that one run where he makes a really nice cut and then trucks the defensive back. It was just like I worded it was thunder and lightning on the same play. And he was running really hard, really aggressive. It seemed like he was really a tone setter. And then Nick Singleton, like you said, he hadn't had a gains this long since the Auburn game. And in that game, it was just so tantalizing what he could do. And then we just hadn't really seen it over the past 3 games. And that 30-yard touchdown run that he had to really ice the game, just ran it up the gut, got through, and then just ran away from everyone. I thought that was a very, very special run. Not something that you can see many guys do. And I think it was a good reminder of the ceiling of Singleton, of Allen, and kind of what this offense as a whole can look like if all the different pieces are clicking, if things are humming.
And tonight was a good reminder that they do have talent on this football field. Guys get the ball in their hands, can do things with it. Nick Singleton had the 30-yard touchdown, the 22-yard reception. Katron Allen was able to go for 14 on a carry. Theo Johnson had a 25-yard gain. Parker Washington, 35-yard touchdown. Tyler Warren, a 38-yard touchdown. These are the kind of numbers that we've been kind of looking through the stat sheet for Penn State, even when they were winning games for these explosive kind of plays. And you saw that in a big way today, forcing the pre-snap penalties. James Franklin was able to give a lot of credit to his Beaver Stadium crowd. Certainly they played a role. Also the fact that Tanner Morgan not able to go. You got a quarterback on the other side, first career start in this setting, 109,000 plus announced crowd in Beaver Stadium. A little bit reminiscent of what we saw from Penn State's former backup quarterback on the road last year when he was thrust into a spot. Hate to see that, but Penn State was able to benefit off of it. And ultimately, defensively, Daniel, Mohamed Ibrahim was able to get his 100-yard game, and that makes 15 in a row for him in games that he's played. But he took 30 carries to get there. And for those who listen to our pregame podcast with Ryan Burns, who covers Minnesota for 24/7 Sports, he said it was going to take Ibrahim 30 to 35 carries in this matchup. But he said it was also going to take 200 to 220 rushing yards. They held him to 3.4 yards average. And overall in the day, 7 TFLs. I thought it was just a tremendous thing, not just getting those pre-snap penalties, but they were able to prevent Minnesota from staying on track, staying on that course by getting some of these tackles in the backfield. And that's not something that the Golden Gophers had dealt with much over the course of the first 6 games of their season.
Ibrahim barely got over the line for that 100 yards, 102, had a touchdown, but only a long run of 13. And like you said, that 3.4 yards per carry really stands out. We talked about it coming off last week. Minnesota could do similar things to Michigan in terms of using their offensive line, wanting to play physical, and having a running back that is hard to bring down. I think we still saw it early where Ibrahim is someone who was always falling forward, was inviting the contact, was willing to take it on and push forward. And Penn State was up to the task this week. I think that last week, I think Jair Brown called it a wake-up call in the post game last week, and I think the defense came out and they were really aggressive. They were swarming to the ball, and the tackles for loss, I think, was something that, especially with how they played last week, that was really welcome to see. I think Adisa Isaac talked about wanting to play more vertical, and that was something that they really focused on, and that really showed up with having guys in the backfield, guys going to the ball. There's a play action pass. I was actually the touchdown pass that Penn State gave up. But Tyler Elsdon absolutely crushed Muhammad Ibrahim on the fake. And I thought that was kind of, and even though the play, Penn State got fooled, Brevin Spanford made a really nice play. But I think that was kind of indicative of the focus that they had on Ibrahim, of how they wanted to stop the run, of how they wanted to be physical, of how they didn't want to be bullied this week. And they were really up to the task.
We heard all week from the players, and I'm sure Manny Diaz would have told us the same thing if we were able to speak with him, that they were kind of blessed with an opportunity to go out and play a team that was going to try to attack them in the same way. And I say blessed because they were able to kind of show, hey, we're not going to be used as a battering ram on a weekly basis. We can stand up against this. Jair Brown seemed to describe this week, and talking to him post game tonight, described this week as kind of the defense finding itself all over again and kind of working its way back to that confidence level. I think you could see before this matchup, especially on the defensive side of the football, the body language was in the right place. It helps when you have the whiteout crowd around you. But last time we saw this team on a field with the opponent, their body language was in a really brutal spot. And so I think this defense, I had a feeling Manny Diaz was going to work his way back into the good graces of the fan base tonight, and he was able to do that for the most part. And a big decision that was made was going with 3-box linebackers for much of this matchup. As James Franklin said, they moved Abdul Carter into the starting lineup first time in his career. He's essentially played a starter share of snaps for much of his freshman season, but got that starting nod this time. And Curtis Jacobs moves back over to the same position that he held down all last year. And Tyler Elsdon at Mike linebacker. And Franklin said you're not going to see a lot of teams play 3 linebackers with these kind of toolbox skill sets over the course of a game. But he felt like the matchup in this situation against Minnesota, the way they were going to approach them, dictated that approach. And so I'm curious, one, what you thought about that maneuver, and two, whoever they're playing week to week, whoever they want to attack you, kind of liked what we saw from those guys sharing the field. So it's something to certainly chew on moving forward.
It was really a pleasant surprise, I think. I think that sometimes Franklin can get pigeonholed as someone who's a little bit stubborn, and that there's a lot of loyalty. And I think that we saw it. We've talked about this before, where under Brent Pry, you just kind of knew what you were going to get week in and week out from that defense. It didn't really seem as flexible as what Manny Diaz has shown so far. So it was one of those things where in pregame warmups, you're looking at how the defense and the offense, the order that they're going through things. And suddenly you look out there and it's Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter and Tyler Elsdon. And it's a combination that we haven't seen before. And they'd announced Jonathan Sutherland as a starter on the video board. And so to see Abdul Carter out there for the first snap, I thought was pretty cool. And I think that it paid off. I mean, Curtis Jacobs, 14 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. Abdul Carter, 8 tackles with a half sack that he split with Daquan Hardy. It was just a very impressive performance by those 2 guys. It just felt like that they were really around the ball a lot. I think that Curtis Jacobs can play that Sam position very well because with his athleticism and his kind of build, he can run around in space and make things happen. So I was really pleased with it. I thought that it was an interesting combination. And James Franklin was asked about it this week on Wednesday and kind of gave the rationale for why it might not make sense. And then so to see it, I thought was an interesting little wrinkle for the game plan. And I think that's just what you want to see from a team that was coming off something like what happened last week. Obviously, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. And they knew that they were going to see something similar from Minnesota, and Manny Diaz and the defensive staff did something about it. So I think that that's a really big positive, both in terms of players on the field, getting Abdul Carter onto the field where he can make things happen. And then from the perspective of, okay, they did try to change something. They did learn something from a game like last week. I think that bodes well as you look forward, and another tough task next week that could put you in a similar situation in 2 weeks when, depending on how next week goes, okay, you have to adjust again after experiencing another top 5 team. What can you take away from it? So I think you can be kind of cautiously optimistic about the defense given what they did and how they responded, both in terms of scheme, strategy, and from the personnel side.
And they did it without Chop Robinson on the field. I mean, he was a guy that certainly stood out to us as everyone's gathering for pregame warm-ups, and he's on the side, not taking part in that. He has been so effective, not necessarily seeing it pile up in the stat sheet thus far, but flashing just as much as anybody off the edge to this point in the season for Penn State. We'll have to follow up. That was not brought up in the conversation with James Franklin in the postgame press conference. I'd imagine it will be early next week about his status for the next matchup. By the way, no Landon Tengwall at left guard. That meant another start for Hunter Norzad, the Cornell transfer. We got some things to work through on the offensive line because Salim Wormley wasn't out there for much of the matchup at right guard. Coming into the day, he'd play as much as anybody on this offense in terms of snaps to this stage of the season. And then Kevon Lee, as we mentioned, not available today. The snap count piece will be up on Sunday, breaking down what we saw, what we learned from that snap count for our VIP subscribers. But Daniel, when we kind of go through and some final thoughts on this defense, Jair Brown come away with the takeaway. Overall, give credit to Minnesota for producing some chunk plays, and they kept battling. They were able to get a touchdown later in the contest against kind of a defense filled with backups for the Nittany Lions. But I thought really something that you and Mark alluded to, the leadership, the veterans. Mark kept saying, I think I trust this veteran group to deliver it. I thought defensively, we talked a lot about Clifford, but Mustafa up front, Jair Brown to the back. I think Joey Porter is really coming into his own as a guy who takes on the identity of this defense. They got up off the canvas, and I thought they delivered a punch of their own. And the big test comes next week. But I loved it. I just loved the way this defense was able to come up. There was no signs of lingering self-doubt. There were no signs of lingering bumps and bruises. And I would have understood if they had that, because they just gave up 418 yards on the ground.
Yeah, I think that you look at what they did, and we've talked about this before with the spiral and the snowballing. Michigan ran all over them. Are they going to let someone do that again? And they didn't. And I think a lot of the credit goes to that leadership. I think I had a conversation earlier this year with Mark and maybe with you about the leadership. And I think that this year it feels a little bit different in terms of the type of leaders that they have. I think that, it's not necessarily more relaxed, but it's a little bit more like Jair Brown feels a little bit more easygoing. PJ Mustafa, we saw him being super serious after the Michigan game last week, but he's someone too who has a naturally gregarious personality. And I think in the past, some of the leaders were a little bit more on the quiet intensity side. And I think that that's something that, there's always a time and place for it. But I think that with some of the leaders and some of the captains this year, I think that they're in a position to maybe absorb things like last week a little bit better, to process it and to maybe kind of diffuse it a little bit better. And they came out and they did really well, I think, in that front. And I think some of it too goes back to the other side of the ball with Sean Clifford, where say what you want about him. I think that he's someone that everyone on that team feeds off of. I think part of that is because he's the quarterback, but part of that is just because he does over and over again what him personally, like what this defense needed to do in terms of, throwing an interception, coming back and playing, a very clean game for the most part. He's kind of a microcosm in one game of what the defense and other parts of the team have to do on a week-to-week basis. So I think that it's intangibles. I think that this is a spot where that comes through for you and can really get you back on track and put you in a position to have success when there's the chance that things could go haywire again.
Yeah, Minnesota came in as a team that really performed well on third down among national leaders in that category. Today, 2 of 13. Kirk Ciarrocca's got a lot to talk over with his young quarterback. We'll see what awaits them and Tanner Morgan moving forward. But Minnesota has now lost 3 in a row. Penn State back on the upswing with a W, hosting number 2 Ohio State. Ohio State had no issues with Iowa today. They're going to come in unbeaten, will the Buckeyes, next week. And Penn State, though, all 3 phases. Good day from the special teams. James Franklin said it time and time again in his post-game press conference. He was very pleased with this performance, and I think we've got to give this coaching staff and this group of players credit, because in covering this program, that 0-5 start was kind of its own beast in the nature of what that 2020 season was. But this week, Daniel, was about as intense as I have kind of felt the microscope on James Franklin, on Sean Clifford, on the offensive play caller, on the defensive play caller, even just collectively of what a letdown performance in this stage would have meant for the program. Instead, you're coming out of this convincing victory, as you'll read on Lions 24/7 in the hours and days to come. A very impressive experience for recruits who were on campus, and there were a lot of them, regional guys from across the country. Check all that coverage out at lions247.com. And, of course, we have a ton of coverage coming out of this matchup about the Nittany Lions. Daniel, appreciate it, man. It's well after 2 a.m. now. So we got it done here, another late-night podcast. But we'll talk to everybody really soon. Lance Glenn behind the scenes staying awake with us as well. We are back with another episode on Monday to kickstart Ohio State week here in Happy Valley. Penn State improves to 6-1 with a 45-17 victory in the whiteout. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast. We'll talk to you soon.